I'm David Fernandez, Legislative Specialist with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Today, on Arizona Wildlife Views, there are all kinds of fishing methods, everything from fly fishing to spear fishing. But have you ever heard of electrofishing? Arizona Game and Fish shows you how it's done and why. Plus, did you know there are exotic, edible mushrooms growing wild right here in Arizona? We'll get a lesson on how to pick the right ones and how to avoid the ones that can make you sick. We've got all this and more today on Arizona Wildlife Views.
Arizona Wildlife Views is brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects made possible by the Sportfish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Arizona Game and Fish biologists routinely conduct fish surveys to better understand fishing communities. Today on Arizona Wildlife Views, we'll see how they're using the power of electricity to help increase the tiger trout population.
We'll just be cruising. We'll cruise to the next site. I kind of want to cover most of the lake.
Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Peoria Planning and Zoning Commission to order. I want to welcome everybody attending tonight's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We're glad to have you with us. We're going to begin with a roll call tonight. Chairman Sean Hutchinson is absent. Secretary Jay Otluski.
Present.
Commissioner Brian Patterson.
Present.
Commissioner Linda Grice.
Present.
Commissioner Clay Alsop.
Present.
Commissioner Joanna Condi.
Present.
And I, Vice Chairman Jeff Nelson, am President. In Chairman Hutchinson's absence tonight, I will be chairing. I'd like to read an opening statement that we begin all meetings with. This commission is composed of Peoria citizens who have been appointed by the City Council to serve on the commission as a civic responsibility without compensation. Our duty is to study and review planning and zoning issues within the city of Peoria. The commission hears zoning cases, holds public hearings, or may conduct a study session on a topic. Decisions made by the commission are forwarded as written recommendations to the City Council, who take final action. All hearings are conducted in accordance with the rules for procedures and Robert's Rules of Order. Each case will be called in the order in which it appears on the agenda unless otherwise announced during the meeting. In the interest of maintaining a fair and efficient hearing, the commission adheres to the following steps. Chair will open the case. City staff will then provide a brief report and recommendation. The applicant is invited to give a presentation. Then any member of the public may provide testimony. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes. When we call your name, please come up to the podium and provide your name and address. After all the testimony has been taken, we'll invite the applicant back up to provide any rebuttal or final statements. The commission will then discuss the case and make its decision. Anyone wishing to speak must complete a speaker's request form and hand it to the commission assistant on my left. When providing testimony, we ask that you please be as brief as possible and avoid repeating statements already made by others. Any member of the public may appeal to the City Council the decision of the Commission regarding a conditional use permit. The appeal must be submitted in writing to the Planning and Community Development Department within 15 calendar days of the date of the Commission's decision. All Commission recommendations on public hearing items, including general plan amendments, rezone, zoning code amendments, and special plans, move forward to a regular City Council meeting. The City Council will then act on the recommendation of the Commission. The City Council may concur with the decision, modify it, overturn it, or remand it back to the Commission for further consideration. We welcome citizens' comments, and as fellow citizens of Peoria, we thank you in advance for your participation. This is the final call to submit speaker request forms. If anyone wishes to speak, please fill out a speaker request form and provide it to Ms. Ernest at the end of the dais. Next on the agenda is consent agenda. The consent agenda is for items that are routine in nature and consist of 2 items tonight. Item 1C, discussion and possible action to approve and excuse the absences of Vice Chair Jeff Nelson and Commissioner Clay Alsop from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on November 1st, 2018. Item 2C is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on November 1st, 2018. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments about the consent agenda items before us tonight? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 and 2C.
Thank you, Secretary Atluski. We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Condi. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioners. Next, we move on to our regular agenda. We have one item before us tonight under the heading of new business. Item 3R is a city-initiated request for 3 major amendments to the Peoria General Plan, consisting of the following. Case GPA 18-02, Circulation Map Update. Case GPA 18-03, Land Use Map Update. And case GPA 18-04, Text Modifications to Chapter 2, Land Use Element, and Chapter 14, Plan Administration. We're going to take action on each of these cases separately, but the staff report will cover all 3 cases. Is that correct? Thank you. Staff, go ahead and present your report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Cody Gleason, Senior Planner with the City of Peoria Planning Department. As referenced, we are bringing 3 cases before you tonight for recommendation to the City Council. Those being GPA 1802, 03, and 04. They're really part of a larger effort that we're engaging in for what will end up being a complete rewrite of our City of Peoria general plan. As a part of that, we wanted to take several items that we needed to make refinements and modifications for in preparation for that rewrite forward before we went ahead with a comprehensive rewrite of the overall plan itself. So kind of as a part of that larger Plan Peoria AZ effort, we're taking this incremental step tonight in proposing these 3 general plan amendments. As referenced, one would cover the circulation modifications within the circulation plan of the general plan, as well as the land use plan changes, and ultimately the text modifications, all of which we'll be discussing here tonight. And it'll seem like deja vu, but tonight, as opposed to our last meeting, you will be taking action on those items. So the circulation plan, this really identifies the roadway network within the city and perhaps more importantly, the future roadway network, how those linkages work throughout the city and how we convey citizens to and from various points within the city. The idea behind this is we wanted to capture areas where existing entitlements had occurred and perhaps refinement was necessary to convey the vision of those entitlements into the circulation plan, but also update it because one of the last updates was in 2012, so we needed to make modifications to accurately represent things that had been constructed since that 2012 update so that they were appropriately shown in the plan. As a reference, this will capture a lot of the development that has occurred, but also the future development. One of the items that we tried to incorporate was essentially a supplemental map with a keyed system so that members of the public would be able to easily reference what information was changing. That's not a part of the general plan, just merely a supplemental document for essentially ease of reading. There's 2 exhibits, one being the keyed map, and then ultimately the classification or circulation map. The circulation map does not act as a classification map, so the circulation map will identify whether a street is an arterial or collector, a parkway or arterial, but it won't get into the designations of major or minor. It'll leave those specific designations to the engineering department's classification map, and that'll kind of be based on the specific development that occurs so that we can refine those changes as we go. Here you have the maps I was referencing. Now, in our last meeting, it was identified that there would be perhaps some confusion with regard to some of the symbolism that was shown on the map and whether or not that would designate something that's existing or future. We went over that and tried to think about ways that we could identify those changes and incorporate something that's existing but not built to its future condition. So in order to alleviate perhaps confusion with new symbology, what we did is we added a note to the circulation map that identifies that some of the items that are designated as future, though they may exist in some form today, for instance, State Route 74, it exists today, but it's not existing in its ultimate build-out condition. So we wanted to add that note to try and address those concerns in a way that would still reflect it as future for the map itself, but not necessarily show it as existing in its ultimate build-out form. With that, that's the end of the circulation items. Were there any particular questions on that before we move on to the land use portion?
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. Lori Deaver. I am back before you once again, talking about the last two amendments for this evening. The first one before you is for the land use map update. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with what they're looking at, as we affectionately call it, the Creole kind of flavored map going on there. The land use map is essentially a illustration, if you will, of all of the land use categories within the city of Peoria. They do not follow property lines. They actually go and are kind of organic in nature. So the actual map covers a much larger area than what the land that it's currently within city limits. It does cover the municipal planning area, so you do see that it does extend out and about compared to what our city limits are. So the modifications that we presented last time, essentially we are recognizing existing conditions as they are today. Previously in the general plan, there was a provision that allowed developers and such to not have to amend the plan as they were bringing rezoning cases going forward if they met certain criteria. And subsequent to that, we had a significant amount of growth that took advantage of that. So we are trying to get the map as updated as possible to provide specificity where it has occurred, to recognize existing conditions. We also have some updated FEMA floodplain and floodway designations. So we are incorporating updated environmental data into there. And since the original land use map categories were put on there, we've got some significant, most precise tools, GIS, topography. And so we're bringing a level of sophistication to the map that wasn't seen as before. This becomes a foundational document as we go forward within the rewrite. It becomes a good base to start working from. So we wanted to ensure that we had good recognition of existing conditions. So going forward, it was a collaborative exercise. We did receive quite a bit of feedback from various groups. We didn't necessarily go out into the vacant areas and reposition the properties. It's solely focusing on the existing developed properties for the most part. Some of the adjustments did actually result kind of in tandem as we made changes to the general plan map. Some of those alignments and shifts in roadway caused certain land use categories to kind of move around and shift. So there's a couple of those instances as well. So for this particular exercise, since we were simply updating a base map, we used the existing format as it was. Next cycle, next rewrite that we present in front of commission and so forth, we do expect to have a much modernized looking map. So right now, we're just trying to get the land use colors in the right location using the existing format. So the graphic that you see on the left, we're very strategic in what we went in and modified. It is not, the whole map is not highlighted on that left, so it's actually very specific pinpoint areas. Everything that you see highlighted in color were the areas of change in question. The resulting collaboration, if you will, if you put it back into the grand scheme, that is the figure on the right. So that is the proposed land use map. So I'm going to pause right here. Were there any questions on the land use map update?
Commissioner Connie?
Yes, and it's probably so obvious I'm not seeing it. I hadn't noticed before the active mining operations. And I would assume that is gravel, or are we digging for gold, or is there silver in the land underneath Peoria? I was just curious. I hadn't really thought about that before, and I did notice that. So could you explain?
Chairman, Commissioner Condi, yes, we are required by state law to identify mining sites on the map itself. And so it depends on, the mining could be any number of things. It doesn't necessarily limit it to one thing or the other. If it is a mining site, we do need to illustrate it on the map so that people are aware of it.
Any other questions of Ms. Deaver? Guess not. Thank you.
Okay. So the last amendment before you this evening is the one that deals with the text changes within the general plan. So in addition to the map adjustments that we are making, GPA 18-04 are changes to Chapter 2, the land use element, and Chapter 14, which is the plan administration. Starting with Chapter 2, as we kind of talked about, the land use map kind of illustrates what the colors are and the categories are. Chapter 2 actually defines what each of the land use categories are in particular. It provides description, density, intensity, kind of talks about what is expected in each of these categories. So previously, for instance, like I'll pick Desert Harbor because I know it well. The lake and Desert Harbor was shown in green because waterways were a part of the park open space category. In this particular map refinement, we're actually pulling it out of the park open space category, and we're creating its own separate category as a way to better recognize and preserve our waterway conditions. So that's one change. The other one is elimination of the residential percentages in the mixed use category. What we're finding is it's kind of an arbitrarily set number. It's from 30 to 60%. We do have developments coming in that have met that, but it has been a restriction and a detriment to some other developments that have potentially wanted to come in. This is an interim proposal, if you will. We're looking at long-term in our more mature areas. How do we activate those areas and reposition them down the road? Or how do we best allow market conditions to determine what is the best product at that location? So in some instances, they may not be able to achieve a 30% residential kind of product there, but it may be appropriate for the area. In other words, they may want to have more residential than the 60%. We look at it on a case-by-case basis. We look at it in the context of the neighborhood. Does it make sense? Is it appropriate for the area? What's the scale and intensity? So what we're saying is if there is residential in the project, which we believe is appropriate, it needs to be at a proportionate size and appropriate for the area. So we're kind of allowing kind of more of a nebulous organic development to occur in that condition. The other one that I'm going to talk about is a correlation refinement. So within the general plan, we do have some correlation information. As we've gone forward throughout the last couple of years, we are seeing a significant number of residential communities that may be proposing lot sizes in a smaller category than what would typically be associated with the individual land use category. For instance, in a low-density residential category, we would expect to have the smallest lot size in there, approximately 8,000 square feet. Depending on the nature of the project, 8,000 may or may not be appropriate. We've seen some 6,000s come in as well. What we are suggesting is if the general plan category is either estate density residential or low density residential, the expectation is the majority of the lots would fit in the correlating zoning district category. It's not to say that smaller lots in that particular project may or may not be appropriate. It would be up to the applicant to provide additional justification in that manner as to why they are proposing the lot sizes they are in the lot mix that they are. So it's just setting the expectation that it's our expectation that the majority of the lots coming in would be correlating with the existing land use category. If we're finding that it doesn't necessarily match up, we may request a minor general plan amendment at that point in time and allow the applicant to further explain why the project would be appropriate at that location. So I'll pause right there if you have any questions.
Commissioners have any questions at this point? Commissioner Alsop.
I had a question on the waterways. Is that what the word was that you turned?
Yes.
Is that for, how are you defining those? Is it based on water flow? I'm just curious, is there a restriction imposed on those based on the flow of the water, or can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Chairman, Commissioner Alsop. So essentially what we have is FEMA designations of floodway corridors. There's floodways, there's floodplains. Floodways are typically areas where you would not be able to develop whatsoever, kind of a 404 if you're familiar with that term condition. Floodplains, in certain instances, those particular areas may be adjusted through engineering practices to recover the area and make it developable. So what we have suggested is when FEMA has designated an area as a floodway, essentially, where water would normally be, we are treating that as a water in our land use map. So those are areas that we would look to preserve in its entirety. Adjacent floodplains are considered park open space in that manner. If it is appropriate for the actual development, those areas may be adjusted as needed.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any further questions? All right, continue.
So we're into chapter 14 for the text changes. This actually explains how the general plan is administered and how we process amendments. In this particular section, we are clarifying major and minor amendments in terms of the criteria used. And so I didn't know if the commissioners had any specific questions on what the language is proposed.
Doesn't look like we do.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as we go into looking forward, part of the discussion has been for public outreach. This is a major general plan amendment which has specific notification requirements and outreach requirements because of state statute regulations. Part of those requirements is that something that we call the 60-day review. We are required to transmit a copy of all of the amendments that are proposed for the year, major general plan amendments, to local, state, and federal agencies. They are allowed 60 days to review and provide comments back to the municipality making the request. So we transmitted that packet on August 8th. We did receive comments back from 2 agencies. Those would be Luke Air Force Base and the City of Phoenix. Luke Air Force Base did not have any issues with the amendments being proposed. The City of Phoenix identified there was a possible area of concern. Upon further conversation with them, it was just a clarification. There was no actual substantive change, and so they were comfortable with what was being proposed. So in addition to regulatory requirements of reaching out to agencies, we opened this up for public comment as well. We had 2 open houses, August 28th and 29th. We also provided the information on both our website and the Plan Peoria AZ website, and there was a digital media push out as well to provide comments, emails, phone calls, etc. So we did receive some great comments, including from the chairman also. Your information is provided in a errata sheet. And as comments were received, we determined if it was appropriate to make changes this cycle as a cleanup and an update process, or if there was something more long-term that we needed to consider, those were kind of couched, if you will, and those will be evaluated as part of the full comprehensive rewrite process. So in that's a couple of instances, we did have some minor refinements to the maps, if you will, because of that, and some cleanup of a couple of different text items in here for like typos and a few other things that we kind of caught as well. So,
Eva, can I ask a quick question? On the agency review, I assume neighboring counties had an opportunity, particularly the north of Pleasant, would have reviewed this as well. Did we have any comments back from them or any concerns?
Chairman, no. We provided an extensive list. In fact, it is within the packet itself to all of the various agencies. We'd also notified school district, so Phoenix, Glendale, Yavapai, Maricopa, MAG, ADOT, you name it, and it's probably on the list out there in terms of outreach. We only had the 2 comments.
Okay, thank you.
And I attribute it to kind of this is a cleanup effort versus the comprehensive rewrite. We do expect to be working with our stakeholders to continue that dialogue going forward. So for instance, like state land, we do anticipate the majority of their comments will be on the next cycle and not on these particular amendments.
Thank you.
So since this is a major general plan amendment, the requirements are 2 meetings. The first one was held November 1st. This is the second one. This is where we do ask for a recommendation to City Council. So we have 3 recommendations and 3 actions, as you noted, Commissioner. We are recommending approval of all 3, the GPA 1802, 1803, and 1804. So with that, I'll take any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Deaver. Any commissioners have any questions of staff? Very good. I'm going to open the public hearing. Mr. Ernest, have you received any speaker request forms for any of these 3 cases? Last opportunity if anybody wants to provide comment or has any questions. All right. Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. All right. One last chance here. Any further questions or comments from commissioners before we take action on our first case? GPA 18-02 circulation map update. Commissioner Patterson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say, staff, I think you did a great job again on all these graphics and background data that had to go into this. I think your solution on circulation map was a good one to clarify future versus existing roadways. So thanks for responding to that comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. All right, seeing no others, do I have a motion on case GPA 18-02? Commissioner Patterson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of GPA 18-02.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Connie. We have a motion and a second. Please vote on the first item, GPA 18-02. And it passes unanimously. Next is case GPA 18-03, land use map update. Again, are there any further questions or comments from commissioners before we take action on this next case? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
Yeah, I'd make a motion to approve case GPA 18-03 to City Council.
Thank you, Secretary Atlisky. We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Alsop. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. And again, that one passes unanimously. Last up is case GPA 18-04, text modifications to Chapter 2, Land Use Element, and Chapter 14, Plan Administration. Again, are there any further questions or comments from the commissioners before we take action on this case? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for approval of case GPA 18-04 to City Council.
Thank you, Commissioner Condi. We have a motion on the table. May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Alsop. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. And it passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioners. Next agenda item is call to the public. Are there any comments from the public on non-agenda items? Seeing none, let's move on to our next agenda item, updates from staff. Does staff have anything to report tonight?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we've noted when the next meeting will be. It'll be a special meeting that we'll hold on the 13th. Also, I wanted to let the commission know that the city council has approved the appointment of a new commissioner. So Ms. Danette Dunn, she'll be joining and be seated with the commission at the next meeting. She'll be the alternate member here. And then finally, this is our last meeting before Thanksgiving. I wanted to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, have safe travels. And that's all tonight.
Thank you for your report. Next is Planning and Zoning Commission updates and report of current events. Do any commissioners have any updates or current events to report? None? See no further business. I call this meeting adjourned.